So, John, how did you become interested in the Alexander technique?
Well, let me think. It came at the end of a sort of a long trail. I'm 66 now. I became an Alexander teacher in 1986, I guess. And but it was years earlier, back in the late 60s, when I graduated from university, that I probably started on a trek to find out what was wrong with me, I guess is the way to put it. I just wanted to feel better in my body. And so the Alexander technique came down through the years when I read an article about it.
When did you read the article? What was the article, and what effect did it have?
I think it was Frank Ottiwell, I believe, that had written a short but very. I guess it was the fact it was such a personal article. I was living in Tucson, Arizona at the time, and he taking a dance class, and I think this article was pinned up on a bulletin board. And it appealed to me, and I discovered at the time that there was an Alexander teacher there, and I started lessons there, and almost immediately went out to an event out at oh my gosh, the years go by. What is it out in California? What's the name of the place? He'll come to me later in the interview, but that was back in the early '80s. When I would have first had contact with the Alexander technique. And, after my first lesson or two, I really knew that it was something I had been looking for. I remember the sensation of coming up out of what I remember saying it to myself, I'm coming up out of the morass, almost like some organism coming up and out of the ocean. His head was above water finally, And,
you said you were looking to find out what was wrong with you. What were your complaints prior to studying the technique?
Well, I would probably say they were a little bit vague. I was a pretty happy kid, I would say, in general, growing up. But I did have, I had epilepsy. When I was 7 years old, I had my first epileptic seizure, and by the time I guess about the time I was 18 or 19, I gave up using medication and managed to get away without it. So in a certain sense, the outward signs of epilepsy only lasted with me maybe 10 or 12 years, but it didn't make me feel any too good about myself. And the other things was just feeling insecure in my body. Probably, puberty played into that. I didn't feel in some ways the man I wanted to be. Things like that. I didn't have any specific. Later on in life, I had some severe lower back pain, which was a real good impulse for me to get involved in the Alexander technique. But earlier on, I hadn't had that problem.
When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, a baseball player, nothing unusual. Later on, I had developed a real affinity for animals as I was growing older. I'd go out and I'd explore bugs in the yard, and I'd catch ground squirrels and snakes and put them in cages and butterflies. I was probably headed towards something in biology, but didn't ever quite make it. What else? Oh, when I started college, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I gave up on that as well. The 60s arrived, and I became more of a back-to-the-lander hippie instead.
Where were you in the social pecking order in high school?
Oh, gosh. the social pecking order. I had a few friends, and that was it. Gosh, let me think. Well, here's the story. When I was young, when I was in elementary school, I really felt like king of the mountain. I was a happy kid, and I liked people, and I was well liked. But it was junior high and high school where I took a dive. So in high school, I wasn't pecked away at. I wasn't, I was just ignored, I think, in some ways. Or I might have been thought of as too brainy by some. But that isn't exactly the case.
Well, you've got me really curious now. Why do you think you took the dive? You were this happy kid in elementary school, and then something happened in junior high and high school.
Well, I think it was probably puberty was the biggest part of it. Kind of boy-girl relationships. I just became, that sort of confident kid I'd been when I was younger. That confidence started to disappear. I recall that I was being pushed by friends in junior high school to run for an election, and they didn't have a head boy or head girl, but they had sort of a student council. I was just became very timid and said, no, it's not for me. And so I kind of I pulled away from any kind of groups that were the most popular at the time, I guess. So I'm probably not making it any clearer. Maybe it's not that clear to me, but that's my story, I think.
I'm wondering if you were late to puberty. For instance, I was late to puberty, and therefore I was kind of behind the more successful males of my age group because they were kind of racing ahead of me. Well,
yeah. I think also I had an intellect. It wasn't just a matter of being. My father I had a father who I really loved dearly, and I even knew it then. What you don't always know. And he had just unique features about him that he was his own man in a way. And I think I started feeling separate from other kids a little bit. Not necessarily in a bad way, but I knew that I was starting to search for who I was apart from just the daily life of a high school, for instance,
Why do you think the Alexander technique spoke to you so deeply?
Well, probably at first because it mysteriously changed me, for short periods of time at first. But it was definitely the tactile kinesthetic experience of hands-on that was made me aware that, I think it makes you aware that you are potentially more in control of your feelings and your responses than you know you are. In other words, if I could just repeat that experience I was having with the teacher, then I would be more in control. And that was probably seemed like a godsend at the time. At that time, I was also having back pain. I was a carpenter a good part of my adult life, and lower back pain set in, and that didn't help a bit. It would put me out of work for 3 or 4 days. I'd be crawling around the ground in pain, and it was bad at times. So that was the final spark to get me to take up the Alexander technique in earnest.
Why is an intellectual man such as yourself working as a carpenter for much of your life?
Well, I was there's been a couple carpenters around who were intellectuals.